So another important thing you want to do is see if the book has been well reviewed by others. So what that means is if you're looking on the back cover or the inside at the foreword or anything like that, have there been other people who are also experts in that field, that subject, who have read the book and are saying something favorable about it? So in the example of African American Political Thought, this has 3 people who have reviewed it on the back. They wrote just a little blurb is what they'll call it, a little paragraph. One guy from City University of New York, one guy from Princeton, and one person from the New School. So those are people who also well-educated, working at important universities and had something favorable to say about the book. So that's the kind of thing you want to know. You can look at the book and say, is anybody else who is an expert in this area read that book? All right, so when it came to the book Exiles, I did the foreword and I wrote a little blurb on the back. So at the time, I had a Master of Divinity from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. Now I have a Doctorate of Education. So if you just looked at it and you saw my academic credentials, then that gives you some sort of semblance of, this is a person who has an actual education, works for a school, and knows a little bit of what he's talking about. Another person who wrote something on the back was Dr. Stephen Presley, who graduated from St. Andrews University and is an assistant professor, or was an assistant professor at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. So for the Exiles book, it was written by people in prison. It was self-published, but it had people like myself and another professor and several others write and review it well. So that would be something you want to look at. However, keep in mind that the people reviewing it should be in some way educated in that area as well. For example, there's always popular books about conspiracy theories surrounding the Bible, or, like this one is called Cracking the Bible Code. There's been a bunch of books about how there's secret messages in the Bible or in the Quran. If you look at the Hebrew and the Greek or the Arabic, there's this sort of discipline that's been around for hundreds, thousands of years called gematria, where people look at the numerical equivalents of letters in the Greek and in the Hebrew, and then they come up with all sorts of secret and hidden messages. There's been books written like this about Nostradamus. Well, in this one, this is about, cracking the Bible code, about interpreting certain things in the Bible, making use of secret wisdom, secret knowledge in the Hebrew and Greek. All right. So this is so we're going to look at this and say, okay, this is published by Quill, an imprint of HarperCollins Publishers. HarperCollins is a good publisher. Not necessarily that they publish a lot of great academic material, but they're an old publishing company. They're very well known. To get published by a Harper Publishing Company is not an easy thing to do. So it passes the first test of reliability. It's by HarperCollins, check. Then you want to look at it and it says Jeffrey Santinover, MD. Well, MD means he's a medical doctor. So the first thing you want to look at is this says the real story of the stunning discovery of hidden knowledge in the first 5 books of the Bible, Cracking the Bible Code. So this is a book about the Bible and interpreting the Bible. So presumably you would want to read a book that's about the Bible. And this says the first 5 books of the Bible. So that's the Old Testament. You would probably want to read a book about the Old Testament from somebody who has an education or background in the Old Testament. Here it says he has an MD. So he's a medical doctor. That's fine. He's a smart guy, but that ought to make you question whether or not you can trust some of what he says, because just because you're a smart person with a medical degree doesn't necessarily mean you're also smart and well-educated in the interpretation of the Old Testament. But my point in bringing this up is to look at who is reviewing this book. Now, in the African American Political Thought, it was other people from good universities. When you look here, who's writing reviews of this book? One thing says, a readable, responsible book on a profoundly important subject by Michael Medved, author and film critic. Now, I've heard of Michael Medved. I've heard some of the things. I don't disagree with a lot of things he says, but if you don't know him, you're just looking at this and a film critic has commented on this book. Then you look down, there's another little paragraph talking about how great the book is, and it says Publishers Weekly. So a magazine publication. All right, so this is a book about the Old Testament, the first 5 books of the Bible. and it's written by a medical doctor, and it's being reviewed by a film critic and a magazine company. So just from looking at the reviews, it's kind of questionable whether or not, first of all, the person writing it has any real education in the area, and whether the people who are supporting it or endorsing it are relevant. Because a film critic and a magazine publication, those are not very strong endorsements for a book like this that proposes to explain the hidden secrets of the Bible, right? Now, there's another book like this I remember reading, and I opened it up to see who was endorsing it, and it was like the Boston Globe or the Phoenix Sun or the New York Times or there was just all these media companies that were endorsing the book. It was another one of these books about the secret codes and wisdom in the Bible. It wasn't endorsed by any Old Testament scholars or Bible scholars or literature scholars or anything like that. It was being exclusively endorsed by media publications. Here's an example of something that you would be more likely to look into. This is called The Face of Old Testament Studies, and it's by Baker Academic. So remember, I mentioned that when it comes to Christian publishers, there are some publishers who publish more authentic or academic material, one of which is Baker. So here's The Face of Old Testament Studies. It's published by a reputable press, at least in the Christian academic world. You look on the back, it says he has a PhD from the University of London, and he's a professor of Old Testament and Semitic languages at Ashland Theological Seminary. Then you look who's endorsed this book. There's a blurb right here by Walter Brueggemann at Columbia Theological Seminary. If you are involved in the study of Old Testament, then Walter Brueggemann is a large name. He's a very famous Old Testament scholar, and so he's endorsing this book. Desmond Alexander, Union Theological College, another well-known biblical scholar. Patrick Miller, Princeton Theological Seminary. Robert Hubbard of Themelios, and then someone for the Society of Old Testament Study book list. So this person who is writing about the Old Testament has an education, is a scholar of the Old Testament, is teaching at the university and teaching biblical languages, and it's endorsed by other Old Testament scholars and journals and people who are experts in the study of the languages. So if all you're looking at is these two books, then just based on the publication, both of them kind of pass the test, because this is by HarperCollins, but this is by Christian academic research publication. But then when you look at the educational credentials and who's referencing or endorsing the book, this one has the kind of endorsements you want to see. Endorsements by people who also have an education in a similar area and are saying something positive about the book. Okay, so now you want to also ask, is the author a reputable scholar? So you've looked at who published the book, you've looked at who's reviewed the book and said something favorable about it, and you're also asking, is the author a reputable scholar? So we've already kind of shown that. You want to look and see, do they have a degree, right? That's number one. Do they have a degree at all? Number two, do they have a degree in the subject on which they're writing? So the guy earlier with the Cracking the Bible Code had a medical degree, not an Old Testament degree. It doesn't mean he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's clearly a smart person to have an MD, but it's better if you have somebody writing with an education in the thing that they're talking about. The other thing is, what school did they go to? Right? Because some schools are better than others. So I mentioned Ivy League schools. There's a lot of schools that are in the prison system. I don't mean face-to-face schools, although there are some of those, but there's a lot of correspondence places that people in prison can write, and they get degrees, bachelor's, master's, even doctoral degrees, or they become a minister through some organization in the mail. And there's a long story about whether or not those degrees are legitimate, but for the most part, I've seen ones that are just taking people's money, and they're not the same thing as going to a free world school. Now that's changing, and there's some exceptions, but usually that's the case. And so you want to know what school they went to. If they went to a really good school, they're going to say that because they want everybody to know that. So that's why, like, on this Exiles devotional, Dr. Presley put that he went to St. Andrews University. he doesn't work at St. Andrews University. He got his PhD from St. Andrews University. And he wants people to know that because St. Andrews University is a good school. You know, if you went to UT in Texas or A&M, if you went to Princeton or Harvard, you want people to know that. So does the person have a degree? Do they have a degree in the right area? And what school did they actually go to? Was it an accredited school? Is it well known? But you can also have other markers of authority in a subject, even if you don't have a degree from a good school or from, you know, some accredited school. You can be an authority in a subject if you've already written a lot on that subject and other people have endorsed you as knowing what you're talking about. So has the person who is writing this book, are they well known for publishing books like this? And other people endorse them. So they don't necessarily have to have a degree in that area. So maybe this guy, Jeffrey Santanover, MD, maybe he's published a lot in the Old Testament. And so that's why he's being considered an authority. But if that were the case, you would imagine he has people endorsing it more than just film critics and magazine publications. So you can be a reputable scholar in a subject and maybe you don't have a degree in that area, but you've done a lot of research in the area and you're well known for your writings. Now, that may be hard for you to know at first because you haven't done a lot of reading yet. And so only after you've read a lot and you've started noticing the names of authors and books in other places do you begin to recognize who's an authority and who's not. But I do have a separate discussion on how to determine whether or not somebody is a credible authority. And that's separate, but kind of overlaps this discussion about determining the reliability of something you're reading.